The Fox is a much better vehicle. It's got higher specificity of its equipment, sensitivity of testing. That's much more likely, and I'm sure what they're doing now is they're bringing up the even better mobile testing equipment, so we should know pretty soon. But, I mean, the key here is this wasn't found in a warehouse. This was found hidden away. They didn't want either UN inspectors or U.S. troops to find it. And that it was found at what was supposedly an agricultural facility. That fits with Iraq's M.O.? It absolutely does, because it gives them, if it had been found by inspectors, no doubt we would hear the explanation, oh, that's just pesticides. And we would have been into the endless excuses that the Iraqis always gave to us inspectors. Now, we keep hearing questions asked at the CENTCOM briefings about what's going to determine when this war was over, what's going to determine whether it's a success. And point blank, the general was asked on Friday whether or not this is going to be the first war that ends without proof of the reason by which it was provoked, meaning weapons of mass destruction. How important might a find like this be, David? Well, it might be very important, but I think people should not be as impatient as you saw in this morning's briefing. Look, we've known that the storage areas and production areas for WMD were in the Baghdad to Crete area. We're just now getting there. The battlefield is still lethal, and so you don't have free right to roam. What you do have, and apparently occurred this morning, is you have Iraqis coming forward and telling you where to look. That's how we'll discover these weapons. I'm confident we'll find them. David Kay, thank you very much for your expertise. As always, good talking to you. Thank you, Chris. John?
Chris, back to the front lines, and NBC's Chip Reed is with us now. He's with the 1st Marine Division, and he is standing by just outside of Baghdad on the east side, I understand. Chip, what's going on there?
Well, John, they're in a bit of a holding pattern here. Apparently there is a river with a number of bridges that were blown up by the Iraqis between here and Baghdad, and this Marine Battalion, 3-5, was supposed to move in the direction of Baghdad, but it's been held up a little bit while they rebuild those bridges, or they'll probably build pontoon bridges. We've seen many convoys with truck after truck after truck of pieces of these pontoon bridges. We're looking forward to seeing how they actually do that. So there's a little bit of chilling out going on here, as you can see behind me. And John, you may notice that there's a big difference here. For the first time in 19 days, these Marines and sailors are not wearing their chemical weapon suits. They have been told it is optional now. Apparently it has gotten to the point where they do not any longer greatly fear that there could be a chemical or a biological attack, so they've given them a bit of a break and allowed them to take them off. By the way, the people you're looking at now are the medical team, and they are all Navy. All the medical personnel. These are Cobra helicopters going overhead right now, but all the medical personnel with the Marines are Navy. But, John, there are some people here keeping very busy. There is an artillery battery just across the street that, in fact, just went off and scared us all half to death. They are very busy firing on points around Baghdad. I've been told they are not authorized to shoot inside Baghdad, but they can hit points around Baghdad when they get information that there might be enemy forces in various areas, and they have been very busy. Also, some of the squads here have been practicing urban combat drills just in case it comes to that in Baghdad, if they actually do have to go house to house. Of course, nobody is hoping that that will happen. I would say some of the Marines and sailors here are frustrated that they're not in Baghdad now with the other forces that are in there. They would love to be there at this decisive point of the battle, but there are a lot of them here also who say, hey, we've had plenty of battle already and we could use a break of a day or two. John?
Chip, yeah, the first thing I noticed was you weren't wearing that chemical suit or your helmet, and I was just curious. I'm sure that individual units make up their own mind, the commanders make up their own mind about whether or not to wear those chemical suits. Any idea how widespread this is?
It really isn't. I only know what it is right here. They've given the option on the chemical and biological weapons suit, and as for the helmets and the flak jackets, it's something that people have just kind of decided on their own, apparently. I don't know if there's been an edict on that, but apparently they feel pretty safe here, and I just follow the lead of the Marines and the sailors.
Absolutely, not a bad idea. Let's just talk a little bit about what you have seen along the way and how long you expect to be stopped there.
Well, it's hard to tell. We could well be moving any time, but that, of course, is the kind of information that even if I knew, I couldn't tell. They don't want to say when we're going to be going or exactly where we're going to be going, but I don't think that there's any secret that what's going on here is basically a pincer movement. You have the Army coming in from the west, and you have the Marines coming in from the east, and some of the Marines, reportedly, from wires I've seen, are already in Baghdad. These Marines could well have been in Baghdad if it had not been for the bridge situation. But I don't know when exactly they're going to go in. But this, as I said, a number of them see this as a welcome break from what they've been going through in recent days, because for 4 days in a row, it was just constant battle. And I would say the 3-5, the 3rd Battalion of the 5th Marines, has received about as much combat as any element of the Marines at this point, or at least they tell me that is the case.
Chip,
That's
after
a point of pride, John.
After all of those guys have been through, have they heard the news about the incursion today into Baghdad, about Saddam's palaces that they've taken control of? I mean, there must be a great deal of, I mean, they must feel pretty good about the fact where the U.S. forces are right now.
They do, and they get most of that information, or at least the ones around us, they get most of it from us, because when we do have the occasion, when we're in one place for a little while, to log in, we can read the wires and read the NBC notes in there and find out what's going on elsewhere, and I tell these guys what's in there, or tell them what I can, and certainly they're pleased about that. But I tell you, I talked to a group of guys over here playing dominoes a little while ago, and I asked them how they feel about not being a part of the battle right now, and they were split about half and half, who would want to be in there and who is happy that they have a day or two down. And the guys who said they would prefer to be in there, it wasn't so much that they wanted to be in there fighting, it was that Baghdad is the way home, and they really want to get home, and they made clear that that was their reason for wanting to be there. They want to get out of here, but the reason is that they want to get home. John?
Well, I'm sure you want to get home too, and we all want to see you home soon. Good luck, and we'll talk soon, Chip. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John.
And it is now 16 past the hour. Let's go over to Chris.
Thanks very much. Let's get folks caught up on the headlines now, John. Exclusive information from NBC's Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne. Right now, analysis teams are checking out 14 barrels filled with suspected chemicals hidden in a trench northeast of Karbala. Preliminary findings show blister and nerve agents in those barrels. Members of the 101st were led to the site by a former Iraqi colonel. British officials are waiting for confirmation that a body they found in Basra is that of Chemical Ali. Ali Hassan al-Majid was apparently at home at the time of a weekend airstrike. He is Saddam Hussein's cousin and a top advisor. On day 19 of Operation Iraqi Freedom, here are the latest casualty numbers from the Defense Department. 81 fatalities, 14 of those were from non-hostile incidents. There are 8 missing in action, 7 prisoners of war, and 155 wounded. You can get the latest headlines every 15 minutes here on MSNBC or anytime on the web at iraq.msnbc.com. Well, we just saw from Chip Reed that the 1st Marine Division is in a bit of a lull. Not so for the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, and that is who Bob Arnott is traveling with, our Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent. Bob, what can you tell us?
I can tell you that the United States Marine Corps is now in Baghdad. In a dramatic, bold, and daring move, they have crossed into Baghdad. I cannot share any of the operational details, but trust me, when you see the video later in the day, you will be amazed. A very coordinated operation. Now, at this point, we are sitting on top of an Amtrak. It's a very tense situation here. We have a sniper who has his gun aimed one way. We have the 40 Mike in the other way. U.S. Marines on the ground. The first sight was that of crowds of people coming up to the Amtrak, cheering, go, go, USA. But in between that, light arms fire in 2 separate directions. Cobra helicopters coming in quite quickly to quell it in one direction, U.S. Marines on the ground going out the other direction. These Marines, after a very long, hard slog, could not be more delighted to be right here in Baghdad. They are the 1st Marines. They are planning to establish, of course, a safe corridor here for other Marines. And the lead unit here is from the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. That's all I really should say right now. Back to you.
Let me ask you, though, Bob, because you described some light arms fire, you described snipers, but overall, how would you say, what level of resistance would you say that you're encountering?
Well, there's not much resistance for a very good reason. This whole area was shaped. During our previous broadcast during the night on the video phone, you may have heard very, very intense volleys of artillery, the 155mm howitzer. There was overhead air support, Cobra support. You may also have seen the tow missile that was launched that hit what's called a BMP. It's an armored personnel carrier right around where we were. In fact, at the place where we are right now, there were 3 of these. They have been taken out. So this area has been suppressed, but it doesn't mean it's not a very dangerous area. It's a great unknown. We simply don't know what the Marines are going to encounter as they push further into Baghdad. Back to you.
Understanding you can't give us any kind of exact location or anything, we saw earlier today a lot of houses and the people around them. Can you just describe the general scene where you are? Is it a heavy residential area, or what is it?
Well, let me be fairly vague. It's more of an industrial area with low-slung buildings. I don't want to describe it because I don't want to give away our location here. Also some woodland and what you might call a sort of Iraqi strip mall that's up on the main road. Everything is brown. The buildings are brown. The ground are brown because of the sandstorm here. And you have on the main road here probably 300 people that are coming up in groups to the Amtrak. We have people popping up behind buildings. The sniper is very tense. I mean, looking at them through their sights, ready to kill. But they have very strict rules of engagement. Unless they see a rifle, they are not going to fire at them. There was a white pickup truck that did fire at these vehicles. It has now escaped from here. There's a Cobra gunship overhead. The Marines were just telling me that they are they would not want to be in a white pickup truck at this time. Just let me ask one Marine here. You're now in Baghdad. What's your
again?
Oh, so we have a Marine here. We've been with him a long, hard slog. You've been 19 days on the road. What's it like to finally be in Baghdad?
Oh, we're just happy to be here. Let's get this on.
People are glad to be here, and they really just kind of want to go home. What's interesting is that just how cool they are. This Marine here, whose nickname is Mustang, a lot like John Wayne, not really fazed by a lot of incoming fire, not fazed by mortar fire, artillery. They want to get home. The job's done in terms of getting into Baghdad, and they really have no idea what they face now, except they have a tremendous amount of support. Their entrance here, textbook in terms of having the whole combat air stack. You could hear jet fighters screaming overhead, 4 Cobra helicopters in a very sort of delicate minuet diving inside of each other. They're 20mm cannons pulling off to the side. Still hear them overhead right now. The Amtrak's all lined up, very, very carefully assessing where they are. Now, the commanding officer, Colonel John Meyer, I've been incredibly impressed with. He's a very, very careful man. There's nothing fast. There's nothing rash about this. There's no sudden rush to glory. There's no rush to get to the center of the city. They want to be precise. They want to be careful. They want to make certain that all their lines of fire are set up, and they want to make certain that they bring all of these Marines home alive.
What you can't see, Bob, is that we're showing video now of some of the black smoke that's coming from some of the oil fires, and you just mentioned something about a sandstorm. Can you tell us what visibility is and what you're seeing in terms of the skyline around you?
Absolutely. This morning when we got out here on the reconnaissance run to try and find the route into Baghdad, it was a beautiful sunny day. There was one column of thick black smoke that was coming out of the center of the city, and then literally within about 15 minutes, clouds and clouds of smoke billowing out of the city. Now, there had been a high wind overnight. Naturally, there's a little sand still sticking in the air, but then there was smoke and sand. Not like the oil fires in Kuwait City after the last war, where it was sort of like midnight at noon. It was as if you had an approaching big thunderstorm coming in terms of it being sort of very gray and threatening. And it would come in waves. You may just hear the artillery here in the background, and we can still see big black clouds sort of billowing out. But through here, you can see some sunshine. It's just starting to sort of break through as it does, and it will go back in. The visibility had closed down to as little as an eighth of a mile. The Iraqis really trying to keep the Cobra helicopters out of the air. Fortunately, these pilots, phenomenal pilots, were able to fly in very, very low instrument conditions in support of this operation. Very, very grateful Marines here.
And 3 days ago, Dana Lewis with the 101st Airborne, they stopped wearing chem suits. We heard from Chip Reed today with the 1st Marine Division that they have stopped in the last day as well. How about the 1st Marine Expeditionary?
People are delighted to have them off, as am I. They all have their chem suits off. They still have their gas masks nearby just in case. They, of course, have their flak vests and helmets on. I didn't have one early this morning because I was outside of the line of fire. I do have one on now. I'm happy to report. And these Marines are fanning out. They have the tough job of this house-to-house clearing operation. But before they can call any area safe, they need to go through each of these houses, clear lines of fire to make certain that they don't get in the way of U.S. Marine artillery or air power. So it's very, very carefully coordinated. You know, you think of combat as being this very sort of disorganized, this very sort of impetuous, fast, aggressive, unpredictable, chaotic action. But that's not what you see with these Marines. It's done with surgical precision. Each move is plotted like a chess move, with feints and draws and blocking movements to make certain that they come home with all the Marines that they can. And they, so far, thank God, I'm going to knock on when I say this, that there have been no casualties in the 1st Battalion, the 4th Marines here in Baghdad.
Let me ask you about the level of anxiety, because I'm sure that there was a lot of police and Marines who are with you when they saw that there were crowds of people cheering, but I'm wondering how big those crowds were and how much concern there is that somebody who isn't so happy to see the Americans might pop out of there and be armed.
Well, very clear anxiety. That as you see the crowds of people who are cheering, the ones you don't see are the ones you worry about. We encountered this morning when there were scores of Fedayeen. The U.S. Marines like to talk about a 3-block war where they're delivering humanitarian assistance on 1 block, which they were this morning. They're fighting a guerrilla battle, which they were. Lots of munitions, where we were this morning. Lots and lots of them. Guerrillas trying to make their way in. We saw Syrians. 2 Sudanese came up with their passports. Sudan, of course, being on the list of State Department list of those nations that are held as terrorist nations. So I wouldn't call it, necessarily tense, because they are professionals, but they are their attention is rapt. They have their binoculars on each segment of the horizon here. They're ready to go should they find. In fact, the sniper is just picking up his rifle as I speak, aiming at somebody. I don't see a weapon in the gentleman's hand who's walking on the horizon there, but this has certainly got their attention, and they do not expect this to stay calm. They do expect a real fight here once they have started to make their move into other parts of the city.
Bob Arnott in Baghdad with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, and we'll look forward to those pictures of that move into the city. Thanks very much, Bob. John?
And the operation continues, Chris. President Bush and British Prime Minister Tony Blair are grappling with 3 of the world's toughest conflicts, not the least of which is Iraq. For more on the president's trip, we head to the White House, and NBC News correspondent Bob Kerr is standing by there. Hi there, Bob.
John, good morning to you.
How long is this trip?
Well, it's a short one. The president left early this morning here from the White House on a rainy, windy morning. Took off from Andrews Air Force Base shortly after there, where you see him on the South Lawn. He's scheduled back here late tomorrow afternoon after his 3rd meeting in just about a month with the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair. The focus, of course, is on post-war Iraq, but there will be focus on other issues as well, John.
All right, why Northern Ireland?
Well, it's a location that actually serves the interests of both leaders. Tony Blair is trying, for example, to get a new peace plan for Northern Ireland, a very troubled area, through later this week, and President Bush's presence there obviously is intended to give Tony Blair a boost, also to put an oar into that controversy for President Bush. Beyond that, the symbolism, again, of meeting in a place that has had a long, troubled history between Protestants and Catholics, a violent history as well, is meant to show that peace can be brought to an area, i.e. send a signal that there could possibly be peace in the Middle East as well, which is another issue that Bush and Blair are going to discuss. And finally, John, the fact that this meeting is being held at a castle outside of Belfast in Northern Ireland is a way to get the 2 leaders away from any potential anti-war demonstrators, although we should note this morning that the latest polls in Great Britain show 60% support for the war. That's higher than it's been until now.
Yeah, on Iraq now, Bush and Blair apparently disagree on the role for the United Nations in a post-war Iraq, right? And that's what part of this discussion is going to be?
They do. It's a big disagreement, and Tony Blair is expected to try to put pressure on President Bush to have the United Nations take more of a lead role in trying to put Iraq back together again. One of Blair's ideas, obviously, is to try to mend fences with Europe, with the UN Security Council, after the big problem they had on the Second War resolution. As you know, know, John, President Bush looks at that another way. He's the one who challenged the United Nations Security Council to either act on that second resolution or risk becoming irrelevant. If, in his view, in the president's view, the UN has become somewhat irrelevant, he's certainly not going to give the UN a major role in trying to rebuild Iraq. A lot to do in a very short meeting in Northern Ireland, John.
All right, NBC's Bob Kerr at the White House. Bob, we'll talk to you later. It is now 29 past the hour. It's time for the headlines. New developments this morning south of the Iraq town of Hindiya. U.S. biological and chemical weapons experts believe that they may have found an Iraqi storage site for weapons of mass destruction. A public affairs officer with the 3rd Infantry Division says, quote, "Our detectors have indicated something," and he added, "This is an initial report. It could be a smoking gun." Defense officials have confirmed that a missile struck a U.S. tactical operations center south of Baghdad today, and they believe the missile was from hostile fire. Defense officials say it was an Army communication operations center attached to the 3rd Infantry Division. In Basra, British officials still waiting for official confirmation that Saddam's first cousin and top aide is dead. They believe they found his body. Now, coalition forces struck his home with laser-guided munitions on Saturday. His nickname is Chemical Ali for ordering a poison gas attack that killed thousands of Kurds in 1988. And you can get the latest headlines every 15 minutes here on MSNBC or anytime on the web at msnbc.com. It has been a very busy morning, busy overnight. We want to get a quick rundown of all the action on the battlefield. And we turn to retired Army Colonel Ken Allard. Good morning, Ken.
Good morning, John. As you point out, it's already been a very, very busy day. As we look at our map here of Baghdad, what is interesting is that pincer movement that came in from the southwest and southeast is coming ever closer to becoming the complete encirclement of Baghdad that we've been looking for. The thing that is interesting is that the Marines have crossed the Diyala River. They're half of this quadrant. They are now on the western side of this river. And again, as you can see, that gives them access to some very, very critical things they had to close off to complete that encirclement. The other thing that's extremely significant is the fact that that was essentially a brigade task force that went deep into Baghdad this morning. That, of course, coming from the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, which is mechanized and armored. And that is the thing that gives us an enormous amount of punch to be able to get into Baghdad in pretty much any time we want to. And if you also take a look here at the other side of the map, we've got the 101st moving into position. And again, the idea here is to make sure that in addition to punching into Baghdad, that you've also sealed off all the escape routes. That's the whole point of an encirclement, because as we saw last year in Afghanistan, when you punch that bag, you'd also better make sure you've closed off all the escape routes, because there are some people that you simply don't want to leave, and there are frankly some other people that you don't want to have entering into it. So that's where we stand right now. We'll be talking a little bit more about that during the War Room later in the hour. John,
well, let me just ask you a quick question, because people may be just joining us this morning, and if they missed these pictures overnight, very early Eastern time, it was daylight in Baghdad. You could see these A-10s flying over the city as the U.S. tanks rolled into the center of Baghdad. Tell me how it works.
Well, basically, that is a very, very well-coordinated air-land movement. Listening to Bob Arnott, I think he was somewhat surprised at the precision. This is not a pickup game. And so what happens is when we move into an area, disputed area of downtown Baghdad, that is done in very close coordination between the air and the ground. The Army calls it air-land battle, and you're seeing it demonstrated right here. That A-10 is a tank killer, and it's terribly effective when it comes to routing out any opposition ahead of that armored force. If they get in trouble, they have some powerful friends on high, not just the God's eye view, but also the ability to put fire on those targets anytime they need it.
Yeah, as the people in Baghdad woke up today, they saw those sights of those A-10s flying over the city and then heard the blast as the tanks came through. Colonel Ken Allard, as always, Ken, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later. Now over to Chris.
Thanks, Sean. As you just mentioned, for people who might just be joining us, it's really been a dramatic night in and around Baghdad. Coalition forces storming into the Iraqi capital, engaging what's left of the Republican Guard units, and capturing 2 presidential palaces. For the latest, here's ITN's Catherine Jacob.
19 days into this war, and American tanks and troops are now right in the heart of Baghdad. Across the city, fires and explosions rage as the bombardment of key targets of Saddam Hussein's regime continues. The troops took up position in the main presidential compound. What appeared to be its defenders, Saddam's Republican Guard, fled along the banks of the River Tigris. Our correspondent in Baghdad witnessed the moment the invasion began.
I'm looking out from my hotel balcony now. Just across the river there are fires, huge fires, throwing thick black smoke into the sky. There are firefights going on. I can see what appear to me to be Iraqi troops actually running back along the banks of the River Tigris, back towards the actual center of the city. I can't see from where I am where the armored US division is. I would say it's not too far away. I'm just stretching my neck out now just to see along the balcony where they are. They're probably just around the other corner, but they're very close because you can tell by the reaction of the Iraqi troops who've been manning a position on the bend of the river. I've been watching them for the last 2 weeks. They've now left that position. What appears to be an Iraqi tank has been struck. That's on fire. There are huge columns of black smoke rising up from that fire. Firefights going on all the time. In the distance, there's a presidential palace as well, which I think I'm just looking at now. There's smoke rising up from that as well. Again, it would appear that the US forces are moving ever closer towards the city center here this morning.
US officials on the ground say they are now fully in control of Saddam's 2 presidential palaces. According to eyewitnesses, the information and foreign ministries are yet to fall, defended by heavily armed Republican guards. But they are surely the next targets. Around 100 tanks and armored vehicles have now punched their way into the center of the capital. But even to the bitter end, the Iraqi information minister continues to claim Saddam Hussein is still in control, that US forces are surrounded.
They pushed few of their armored carriers and some tanks with their soldiers. We besieged them and we killed most of them, and I think we will finish them soon. My feelings, as usual, we will slaughter them all. Those invaders, their tombs will be here in Iraq.
But what of the American tanks so visible on the Iraqi streets?
They have no control even on themselves. Don't believe them. Those invaders will be slaughtered.
But despite this defiance, reporters on the ground tell a different story.
What we've seen this morning is this dramatic push by US forces up along the banks of the Tigris. There's gunfire still going on, you can hear behind me. Very loud firefight indeed. In that area, on the other side of the river, it sounds to me it could actually be coming in. I think we're safe here for the time being. It is about a quarter of a mile away from where I am, and I think it's outgoing actually. It's from our side of the riverbank, possibly going over to the other side. It's hard to tell because you can see the dust has settled in around us, but that could be Iraqi resistance. My feeling is it probably is, given where it's coming from.
Adding to the confusion, oil reservoirs have been set ablaze by Baghdad's defenders, darkening the sky with thick black smoke to try to disorientate the American patrol jets. The US troops do not have complete control. Many of the bridges across the River Tigris are still thought to be under Iraqi control. But military officials are urging these troops to give up before more lives are lost.
Delighted to see it happening. I think it is a signal to Saddam Hussein that his regime is over, and I urge what's left of his regime now to capitulate to the coalition as quickly as possible to reduce any further loss of life, particularly civilian, and to save the infrastructure of Baghdad.
The Pentagon says this is not yet the final battle for Baghdad, that today's invasion is an armored raid, that there is still heavy fighting ahead. But while the Americans downplay their action, to those actually inside Baghdad today, the fall of the city must seem close at hand. Catherine Jacob, ITV News.
Meantime, the worst friendly fire incident of the war so far left several dozen casualties in northern Iraq over the weekend. Joining us now on the live line from northern Iraq is Washington Post reporter Daniel Williams with more. Daniel, it's good to talk to you. What have you been able to learn about how this incident unfolded?
Well, I haven't learned more than what was evident yesterday. Some spotter, U.S. spotter on a ridge above Iraqi line thought he saw tanks or a tank approaching and called in an airstrike. It was a hazy, low cloud day, much like today, and whatever the pilot saw or thought he saw was in fact a convoy of Kurdish forces, some American troops, and actually some journalists and jeeps running behind, and it was hit directly by a pretty horrific bomb.
I understand that among the injured was at least one fairly high Kurdish official?
Yes, that's right. One, the brother of the maximum leader of the Kurdistan Democratic Party. Some Kurds were wondering why so many were going out in an area where, in fact, there wasn't a major battle going on. In any case, that gentleman, Waji Barzani, has been airlifted for medical care to Germany.
And what, Dan, has been the reaction of the Kurdistan Democratic Party to this?
Well, they say will not change their position on the alliance with the United States and Britain, which is firm. They have a lot to gain by the fall, if it happens, of Saddam Hussein. They're also recovering slowly territory from which Kurdish citizens were expelled over the years. So this incident will not alter their feeling that they should stick with this coalition.
And Daniel, what can you tell us about what's happening where you are today?
Well, there's a kind of hush on this front. It may have to do with yesterday's accident, or it may be the rhythm here, which has really been stop and go as opposed to shock and awe as in the South. The way things operate here is the Americans bomb, hoping the Iraqis leave, and the Kurdish guerrillas take their place. It's not really a coordinated air-land assault per se. And today, at least on the areas I've been able to visit, there has not been a bombing since before dawn.
Daniel Williams from our Washington Post affiliate. Thank you very much, Daniel. And you can read his story today in the Washington Post or at WashingtonPost.com. 40 minutes past the hour. When we come back, we're going to get you caught up on all the latest headlines. And in addition, we are going to be going to CENTCOM for the latest from there. A couple of chemical weapons finds, what's going on with that, the assault on Baghdad. All of that coming up live from Central Command in Doha, Qatar. And there you see the picture, downtown Baghdad, 4:40 in the afternoon. You're watching MSNBC.
The world has witnessed the skill and honor and resolve of our military in the course of battle. We have seen the character of this new generation of American armed forces. And we thank God that liberty found such brave defenders. There will be a day of reckoning for the Iraqi regime, and that day is drawing near. We will be relentless in our pursuit of victory.
History was made this morning as people around the world watched Greg Kelly's reports as for the first time the United States military occupied the main presidential palace of the President Saddam Hussein. These are the pictures of the front of that palace. You remember, this is the palace, part of the palace compound of some 20 buildings, which stretches for some 2 miles or close to it along the Tigris River, which was bombed in the first night of the shock and awe campaign. If you remember that amazing picture from Abu Dhabi television of one missile after another bombing buildings along the side of that river. Well, this is one of those buildings. Greg Kelly was in it, and I think we have a report from Greg Kelly queued up from earlier in the day. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, but these are the pictures from inside the building. This is from inside the palace. Greg described much of this as just being a mess in there. He described the gold-plated sinks and the rest in the toilets. And I wanted to take you back to one of his reports from earlier in the day. These began happening around 1 o'clock Eastern time in the morning and continued through much of the day. He began at this palace. and reported live there on the taking of this palace and the holding of an American flag out front, but not of raising it because they didn't want to give the impression that we were taking control. Additionally, he reported from the parade grounds where Saddam Hussein would watch and review his own troops. Let's take a look at one of those reports from the parade grounds right now.
Guess where we are, the National Parade Grounds of Iraq. This is where Saddam Hussein comes to see those elaborate military parades. Situation very much under control. We only see American military vehicles here this time. You know, the Iraqi information minister doesn't seem to think that you guys are winning and that you guys are really here. What do you have to say about that?
Oh, he's just across the street from us. We'll go over and talk to him.
Are you planning on paying him a visit?
Yeah, sure. Literally, we're parked right outside of the Ministry of Information's headquarters. We've got the Rashid Hotel surrounded out there. They can look out their window. They can see us. We're sitting right outside of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers. Here is the grand, what do we call this place? The reviewing stands. We're in front of the zoo. We've got, I don't know, look out the windows. You can tell we're in downtown Baghdad.
And we also have some souvenirs here right now. I don't know if we're allowed to take them or not, but the Saddam Hussein statue that hangs kind of overlooking this area was destroyed just a couple of minutes ago by, I think, one of your tanks?
No, by one of Rick's tanks. One of mine.
Rick, what was that? Whoa. That was one of us. That's us. All right, that's us, so you messed up a lot.
And there it was in the early morning hours Eastern Time as Greg Kelly was there at the National Parade Grounds for an exclusive look at the taking of that particular city and of that particular area, and it was an amazing sight to see. We've been reporting on the death of 2 soldiers and 2 journalists, plus the wounding of 15 other soldiers at the 2nd Brigade's Tactical Operations Headquarters south of Baghdad. Major Garrett's at the Pentagon now with more information on that attack. Major, what do you know?
Shepard, I can tell you that here at the Pentagon, as we were gathering as much information as we could from senior defense officials, their eyes were partly on us and partly on the television screen, listening and watching to Ben Johnson's report because it had more information than they had here at the Pentagon. What I can tell you is that based on the review that Pentagon officials have been able to conduct so far, they have reached a preliminary conclusion that this in no way was a friendly fire incident, that this was hostile fire from the Iraqis of 1 or 2 varieties, artillery or some type of rocket launch, quite possibly more likely artillery, since that seems to be what the Iraqis still possess in some quantities in and around Baghdad. Here at the Pentagon, they do know that there are casualties. They know journalists were in the area. They do not have nationalities. They don't even have the status of those journalists, although Ben Johnson reported it is believed there at the scene 2 journalists were killed, as well as 2 Army personnel attached to the 3rd Infantry Division. And here at the Pentagon, they weren't even sure as yet that this had become a formalized TOC, which is a Tactical Operations Center. They thought maybe this was a more mobile variety with vehicles they hadn't even realized yet had been transferred to a permanent structure. So they were behind the curve in a couple of considerable ways to Ben Johnson's report. But one thing we can declare here from the Pentagon, based on their preliminary analysis, this was hostile Iraqi fire, no friendly fire incident, and they're gathering information as quickly as they can, burning up the phones to Central Command and also those on the ground. Shepard, back to you.
And I'm guessing, Major, that there's work to figure out from whence that fire came and to go take care of that problem.
Absolutely, as we speak.
Major, we've not heard, and I don't want anyone to sense that we're concerned about this because it is not unusual that our embedded reporters give us reports and then are down for quite some time. Sometimes there are blackout periods because of the military. Sometimes they just can't get the satellite up. Sometimes they're under fire. But last we heard from Greg Kelly, he was inside that palace there. And then shortly thereafter, after his phone went down, we get reports from Reuters that in fact that palace is taking some shelling from the Iraqis. I'm guessing that's way too detailed to be getting stuff so soon from the Pentagon, but on the outside chance, anything?
Nothing specific, Shepard, except to point out that they've said here at the Pentagon, and it was said again at the podium at Central Command, there are still pockets of resistance, and that resistance can and it sometimes will be lethal. The Marines have found this out today. The Army has found it out today. Pockets of resistance doesn't mean it's not perilous and it's not potentially lethal. It is, and until all of that resistance is suppressed, this isn't going to be over. And when you take a place, when coalition forces take a place as psychologically as vital as the presidential palace, somebody in Iraq, somebody in Baghdad who still has access to a piece of artillery or some kind of weaponry and who still believes the regime has some small, maybe infinitesimal chance of surviving, they're going to fire upon it. And I imagine, as in the case of this attack on the Technical Operations Center and whatever is happening at the presidential palace, as soon as those shells come in, they're being found out the location from which they're coming and being dealt with as soon as coalition forces can.
Major, thanks a lot. Let's take a live look in Basra now, coming in on Rim 5, and there's an amazing story to be told out of Basra today. We have numerous reports, including reports from journalists on the ground there for Reuters, that in fact people went on quite a looting spree in Basra after it was realized that coalition forces had, for the most part, taken that city, looting and taking out the grand piano from the Sheraton Hotel there, I believe it was, and from a lot of equipment from the main state-run bank there and all the rest. A lot of thumbs ups from people driving down this road, at which Associated Press Television News has a camera set down. We have watched trucks full of furniture coming down the road with waving and screaming, and then occasionally you'll see a tank coming down the road as well. This is the scene in the southern city of Basra, where there was an enormous raid yesterday. The British were talking about how difficult a fight it was, and then today the description of waking up and seeing what is a completely different city, with hugs and waves from the locals. The troops seem to be yucking it up with the folks there. The British commanders on the ground saying that though certainly the war is far from over and there will be more battles in this southern city of Basra, no doubt, but much of the disturbances are now over. Much of the problem in the city of Basra was that they had these paramilitary groups, the Fedayeen Saddam and the rest, hundreds of them holed up in buildings. The fight had gone on day and night for the better part of a week. They said they never had any concern over whether this battle of Basra would be won. It was just a matter of timing, and then yesterday's raid apparently did the trick. Earlier in the last hour we were watching as helicopters were overhead and troops were on the move, and then these trucks coming up and down the street, many times loaded with furniture. So there is good news out of the southern city there, and good news in Baghdad as coalition forces have taken over some parts of center city, including 2 of Saddam Hussein's main palaces. With that, let's go down to the Fox and Friends crew for a bit of analysis. Hello, Stephen Bryan.
All right, thank you very much, Shep. Hey, let's deal in from our L.A. bureau, a filmmaker who's put together something called Uncle Saddam. His name is Joel Soler. He's out in the West Coast. Joel, in your film, which I watched yesterday, you chronicle some of the craziness, what a crazy guy Saddam Hussein is. Given today's pictures from Greg Kelly, our embedded correspondent, where U.S. soldiers are going through his palace, how astounding would that be to Saddam Hussein, such a proud man, that the enemy is right there in his crib?
I think to see that the American troops are already in Saddam palaces, I mean, it's amazing. It does prove that Saddam is one of the worst general ever. But you know, if I can react on what happened this weekend, I mean, but we see 3,000 Iraqi soldiers died. You know, the irony, it's for Saddam, it's a victory, because for the more people he's going to see dying, he knows that you know, this will play well on Arab television, and using his favorite weapon of mass destruction, which is the Iraqi people, what he likes.
Yeah, Joel, you talk about his palaces, you talk about his palace, you talk about the tunnels underneath, used in 1991. How elaborate are those tunnels, and do you think Saddam is there right now?
You know, I spent like 2 months with Saddam interior designer, and he did let me film some sketches of those tunnels, and it's real city under the city. I don't think Saddam is there now because, you know, he knows that a lot of people know about those palaces and those underground. So I think he's just hiding in people's house, and again, using the Iraqi people as shelters.
Right, and in fact, Joel, U.S. military we have discovered some of the tunnels that are running under the Baghdad airport. How did you get such, and I'm hoping we can put up some of your film because you had extraordinary access. How did you get Saddam Hussein's people to say, yeah, come on in, take pictures of the big guy?
You know, first of all, I'm not American, so obviously this was helpful. And being French was helpful to go to Baghdad. And I was pretending that I was doing a movie against the sanction. And I did study at the Louvre Museum in Paris, the ancient art from Iraq. And so I was pretending I was doing a movie on the architecture, on the Iraqi architecture. But there is no Iraqi architecture. There is Saddam megalomania, and I was able to spend like 2 months with his architect and also with Saddam interior designer.
So essentially, Joel, you scammed him.
Yeah, but you know, this regime is dictatorship. So if when you're in Baghdad, when you pronounce the name Saddam, everybody is scared, and Iraq is a republic of fear. And I think, you know, destroying today all the statues and portraits of Saddam Hussein, it's a great victory because it does play in people's mind, and I hope this will remove people fear.
Right. Talk about another great victory. You also give a lot of time to Chemical Ali, his relation, an ex-taxi driver who's as brutal as he gets. Talk about symbolism there. This guy is dead. Do you need to parade that body? How do you get the word out that they can now exhale in Basra?
You know, to know that I hope that this is the truth, that Chemical Ali died. I mean, it's
Don't tell me he has doubles too.
Okay, I think it's a great victory. I mean, the guy is a mass murderer, and he had a grip on the Kurdish area in the 80s. After now, I mean, he was the governor of southern Iraq, and I think that seeing him gone, it's one of the best news of that year, I must say.
Now, Joel, as we look at live pictures from Iraq this morning, we see the people are out in the street. They're greeting the American soldiers and the Marines. It is a scene of liberation as we look at downtown Baghdad right now. A lot of members of Saddam's own family hate him. Why?
You know, I spent some time with Saddam's cousin, actually, and of course in front of the camera people will say how Saddam is great, and because they have no choice. But at the same time, you know, when you are in Iraq, you see how disgusting, I'm sorry, the situation is. I mean, I spent like weeks in Saddam hospital, and seeing the people dying and the children not even having a bottle of water or good water. So you see those children dying, and the Iraqi regime want to tell you this is because of the embargo and because of the American, but at the same time, you know, I had the chance to go to all those palaces, to go to the new lake he was building for his birthday. So, you know, the contrast is so disgusting, but of course, you see that Saddam is a brutal dictator, and a lot of people are going to be happy that he's gone.
Okay, Joel Soler, the guy who put together the film Uncle Saddam, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, now back over to Shep.
Steve, Brian, thanks very much. This is a live look in Baghdad where we're told that the bombings have continued. Let's look live quickly in Basra, where at the moment a tank is coming down the street. And in just a couple of moments, you may see residents of this southern city, in fact, just like those right there, many of them with all of their belongings, some of them with looted items, going up and down the street. The southern city of Basra said to be, for the most part, in control of the British. The capital of Baghdad said to be in large part in the control of the Americans, and absolutely amazing scenes from overnight as our own embedded reporter Greg Kelly went through the streets of Baghdad with our own military, showing us Saddam's palaces from the inside, his parade route taken over by the American troops, and at the same time the Iraqi Minister of Information saying it was all lies. The main question now, at what point does, as Brett Baer has been reporting for weeks now, this city fall from within, as so many in the Pentagon, or at least U.S. sources to whom Brett speaks, predict that it will? Could this night, just a few hours from now, when the sun sets on Baghdad, bring a whole new day and a whole new level for the American military? Time will tell, and we'll be here with you throughout. I'm Shepard Smith in New York. For all of us on the morning shift, thanks for trusting us for your news and information. Stay brave, stay aware, and stay with Fox. For John Scott, who is live from Doha, Qatar, and U.S. Central Command. John, good morning.
Good morning, Shepard. Yes, we are at Central Command, the hottest day of this campaign so far. 104 degrees Fahrenheit here in Doha. and it is heating up in Baghdad as well. The picture tells the story. A statue of Saddam Hussein blasted in Baghdad. A bold daylight raid. U.S. forces, including the Army's 3rd Infantry, storm the heart of the Iraqi capital. Fox News bringing you exclusive pictures from one of our reporters who was in the thick of it. One of Saddam's palaces seized. The view amazing in more ways than one. Pictures of our troops settling in to Saddam's home. And talk about denial. Iraq's spokesman all the while claiming that Baghdad is secure, but we know otherwise. And a possible weapons of mass destruction storage site detected in central Iraq. Good morning or good afternoon from Doha, Qatar. I'm John Scott at Central Command, along with Bridget Quinn. Bridget?
Good morning, John. That's right. 9 a.m. in New York, 5 p.m. in Iraq. CENTCOM not yet declaring victory, but it is a historic day, no doubt. Back to you now, John, in Doha, Qatar.
All right, we have seen amazing pictures, Bridget, pictures that were brought to the world exclusively by Greg Kelly with the 3rd Army Infantry Division. U.S. troops taking control of the parade grounds, taking control of 2 of Saddam Hussein's palaces. Let's take a look at the reports that Greg filed earlier this morning.
Inside Saddam Hussein's palace, it's kind of just a bizarre, surreal place to be. This part of the palace was heavily damaged by what we think was a JDAM, this 2,000-pound laser-guided bomb. It really blew apart this room and a vast portion of the palace. But even with that, you still get a sense of the former opulence of this place. Apart from all the damage, there are marble floors, chandeliers, although they're all over the ground. Just anything it's like they just totally shook this room up for about an hour. I mean, the insulation is off from the ceiling. There's piping kind of drooping crazily from the roof, and just complete destruction, at least on that side. Now, in other parts of this house, there are rooms that are untouched that are actually inhabitable, and you might even be happy to spend a night there. And that might be what's going to happen with our unit. We'll know more later. But this place is in shambles as a result of that bomb. They're thinking maybe Saddam Hussein was here when that hit. They're not sure. But even with all the damage, you get a sense that Saddam Hussein definitely lived very large when he was in power.
We are awaiting a briefing here at CENTCOM from the British command. Now, we are expecting at that briefing, or perhaps anticipating some definitive word on the fate of Chemical Ali.